So good morning, everybody, and I have to say thank you for choosing this session rather than the main session on Microsoft. I know we have a lot of competition today, so I appreciate that. So my name is Shahar. I run Caliber. As mentioned, we are a stakeholder intelligence firm based in Copenhagen. And maybe just to start with a couple of words about Caliber before I begin, we essentially help build trusted businesses through brand and reputation tracking, analytics, and strategy. That's what we do, and we do it across all sectors pretty much. We do it in many different countries, and we've been doing it for about 9 years now. I myself have been in the brand and reputation domain for around 25 years. We use technology for sure. We use technology to automate, to accelerate, to activate insights. I'll explain a little bit about this today. But at the end of the day, the purpose is to help businesses build trust. Now, why do we do this? So we believe very much, and I'm just going to go one back, we believe very much that trust and reputation are important. They're important for a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons is that they are intangible assets. And some of you may be familiar with that. Intangible assets, their financial value has been rising dramatically over the years. This is out of a study by Ocean Tomo. They've been looking at the market value of S&P 500 companies over several decades, and they've been identifying the portion of the market value of those companies that is attributable to intangible assets. And you can see that that portion that is attributable to intangible assets has been rising dramatically over the years. So from 17%, this keeps going back, I can see. So from 17% in 1975 to 90% of market value today of the S&P 500 that is attributable to intangible assets. By the way, anybody knows this is S&P 500, so that's in the US. Anybody knows what the proportion is in Europe? Anybody has read this? So the proportion is a little bit lower. It's 71% according to that study based on the S&P Europe 350. But anyway, a substantial amount of financial value is actually encapsulated in intangible assets. Intangible assets are not just reputation and trust. Of course, we're also talking about patents, talking about trademarks and copyright. But numerous studies have shown that reputation alone accounts for between 30 and 60% of, I don't know why it keeps jumping back. Reputation alone accounts for about 30 to 60% of market value. So reputation and trust are important for the financial reason, but of course they're also important for several other reasons. This obviously is a visual that you probably all know. This is, I would imagine, the first time I show this visual to a crowd that actually is familiar with this visual. I'm used to showing it and people are kind of staring and glazing over. But we obviously believe that reputation and trust and brand are important also because they predict stakeholder behavior. So we know, and other studies have also shown, but we know based on our studies, that the extent to which people trust a company, the extent to which people like a company will also predict the extent to which they will behave in a certain way towards a company, buy its products, recommend it, want to work for it, invest in it, and so on. And as such, reputation is an outcomes and impact-based measurement. And that's very important because the idea is not just that it gives you financial value, but also it helps you connect the dots between what you're doing on the communication side with what the business impact is. And that is another reason that we feel reputation is important. Now, obviously, without connecting those dots, it's a lot harder to understand the impact and make informed decisions, which means it's a lot harder to turn insights into action, which is what we're talking about today. So the AMIC model is one of the models that talk about connecting these dots. There's other models that do that as well. But what's interesting is that over the years, we've gotten better and better moving towards outcomes and impact. But still today, and especially when it comes to reputation, there is a problem. There is still an imbalanced focus that most companies have on output measurements rather than impact measurement. And we see it also in the reputation space. So we see today that companies are getting quite good at measuring output. There's a lot of different data points, a lot of different dashboards out there. Most of this data is consumed on a regular, maybe even real-time basis, daily, weekly, through dashboards. And there's a lot of data points that companies use to measure output. But when it comes to impact, what we're seeing is this. We're seeing the traditional, and when I say again impact, I mean perception-based data, the data that we believe is impact-based data. There's also reputation data that is based on media intelligence. That's great. Maybe it's sentiment, maybe it's other things, but it's still output-based. So we believe that the impact-based data, those companies that actually use it, and by the way, around half of the companies don't even have such data, perception-based data. So those ones that do primarily still do it on an annual basis. It's the good old annual survey, stakeholder study that they do once a year. So there's a real imbalance in how much attention is paid to output data versus and how frequently it's consumed versus the attention that is paid to impact data when it comes to reputation. And not only do they do it once a year, they also consume the results through the old PowerPoint report that comes a few months after the data was collected. So why is that a problem? Why am I referring to that as a problem? We believe it's a problem because it prevents companies from achieving this holy grail of insight actionability. So actionability is what we all talk about. Actionability is what we all want. But in order for data to be actionable, for insights to be actionable, there are certain criteria that those insights need to fulfill. So in order for data to be actionable, it needs to allow you or enable you to assess and to also optimize the impact of activities. It needs to help you identify and mitigate risks and crises. It needs to allow you to integrate metrics so that you can understand better and interpret better what those metrics mean, and of course share it across the organization so that it can inform action across many different areas and allow people to take quick action. Now, the annual study or even quarterly measurements, they don't have the immediacy that is needed to be able to identify the connection between what's happening in the world or what you're doing and the impact of that on people. So when you do it only once a year, when you get the results every quarter, you don't have that immediacy that allows you to make those connections. Of course, that immediacy is also lacking when it comes to identifying the impact of crises because they happen in an unpredictable way. It's very hard to then understand the impact on that and to mitigate that impact. And obviously, when you get metrics in a very infrequent way, it's hard to integrate them with continuous metrics and other data points. Definitely hard to share data, and especially when you get a PowerPoint report as a result, those PowerPoint reports, they get distributed and processed very slowly across the organization. So quick action is not what you're going to get out of this. So this is why we feel in the reputation space there is a problem with the traditional way of understanding perceptions, processing, consuming, and also activating those insights. Now, over the years, and I've, as I mentioned, been doing this for 25 years, and we tried a lot of things over the years to improve actionability of reputation data. Asking more questions in the annual survey, using more advanced analytics, basically throwing more money on the results with more consultants and more analysis. We found that all of this does not improve actionability because there's still this lack of immediacy. We actually found that the only thing that improves actionability is continuity. It's continuous and representative data that we found that actually allows companies to identify those reputation triggers, isolate them, to correlate the metrics, to understand how something that's happening in the world is affecting you now, and to make quick decisions and take the required actions. It's the continuous and representative data that allows you, if you consume it in the right way, to integrate with other metrics and to share it across the organization much more easily. And by continuous, I mean daily, like other data points that we talked about before, that those companies consume. So continuous means daily data. Representative also means data that represents your relevant stakeholder universe. Because again, There's a difference between that and actually data that represents random people that are vocal online or any other way that companies are used to getting continuous data. So continuous representative data is what we found to be the key for unlocking actionability in reputation insights. And with that in mind, we put together the Caliber dashboard. Now, the Caliber dashboard is basically a dashboard connected to online research panels in more than 50 countries around the world. Interviews are conducted online, thousands of interviews every day, and the results are visualized in real time on the dashboard, and that dashboard is accessible to multiple of users across the companies on our client side. The idea is that you get the data digitally, so you can integrate it with other data. It allows for integration with media monitoring and social listening, a lot of other data. And of course, all of the users within the company can have immediate access, can slice the data, can look at it in different ways, and also can get different analyses on the dashboard. Now, of course, also with the AI assistant that we have on it, you can query and explain, ask even questions to explain the data points based on a consolidation of the different data feeds. So this is what we set up when we started out on this journey, and we found that to be a game changer in the field. But that has actually become a lot more pertinent as we entered, about 5 years ago, I would say, as we entered this era of the polycrisis, the permacrisis. I know you all heard those fancy terms, but we're finding that that has actually a very big impact on how companies process and use perception data and stakeholder reputation data. The reason is not that crisis never happened before. Crisis always happened. What's changed over the last 5 years is that crises are happening a lot more frequently, and crises are actually impacting companies' reputations. That didn't used to be the case before. So crises would happen, wars would happen, different political changes would happen, but it wouldn't really affect the way people see companies. But today they do. And this environment of having to navigate crisis, as Deloitte says here, it's basically navigating simultaneous interconnected risks and shocks that are now a permanent feature of the corporate landscape. Navigating this environment and knowing how to understand what's happening in the world around us, how to react to it, it brings another imperative for the use of real-time measurements. And we've seen it across many examples, because we track thousands of companies around the world on a regular basis, so we can very quickly see when something happens, whether that has an impact of people's perceptions of certain companies, of certain sectors. And a classic example, of course, is COVID, that really started, in a sense, this era of the polycrisis. When COVID hit, we very quickly saw an impact on people's perceptions of certain sectors. Now, this is just an example, and we're going back to 2020 here, but we measure, in addition to the companies we measure, we also create these global sector indexes. So for example, here we're showing the global average reputation score of the retail sector broken down into food retail and non-food retail. Food retail in yellow, non-food retail in black. And you can see what happened to the reputation of those sectors globally right after the shutdowns. So COVID shutdown started around March in most of Europe and also in the US. And you can see immediately how the reputation of the non-food retail sector has dropped. Now, they didn't do anything, they didn't deserve it, they weren't to blame, but still, people's perceptions of stores that shut down became more negative. The food retailers stayed open, so their reputation has increased. This is just an example of how people perceive you differently because of a macro event that you have nothing to do with. That's happening all the time now. And the data is very useful because companies need to know how to address that, because that will also be registered. How do they react to that? What do they say about it? That will also be processed by their stakeholders and affect how they perceive them. And we also saw it in political events. This is an example of a political event that happened in the US, the voting legislation in Georgia back in 2021. And anybody here remembers that story? It was a pretty big deal at the time. Basically after the controversial elections there a year before, and the Georgian legislature wanted to pass a bill that limits voting rights in Georgia, and it was interpreted by many as disenfranchising black voters. So that became a big deal, and one of our clients at the time was headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and they decided to remain silent throughout this process. So this is the reputation score. We call it the trust and like score, by the way. So what I'm showing you here are results from the trust and like score on a daily basis, and they decided to stay silent while this process was happening. So there was a bill, it was deliberated, and they decided not to have any opinion about that, and their reputation started to go down. It started to go down because it actually started with an employee resource group within that company that started being vocal about it, saying, why are you not being vocal about this? Why are you not reacting to this? Why are you not taking a stand? They decided not to take a stand because they didn't want to alienate anybody. But then that resource group became louder and louder, and that basically flowed outside into a consumer boycott because the company was not taking a stand. Eventually, the company used our data to understand better, what stakeholders are expecting. They crafted a response, they published that response, and they also looked at how their reaction is resonating among the different stakeholders, among the different audiences, and their reputation bounced back. So eventually that company did have a position against the legislation, and they decided to take that move, and that made a big difference. So this was another example for us that in today's world where things are happening outside of your control, you need to have continuous real-time information, unbiased information that allows you to make decisions and to take actions. And maybe sometimes the decision is not to take an action or not to intervene, but that decision needs to be well-informed. So that's why we believe that the whole landscape of using perception data, stakeholder perception data, reputation data is changing. And we're not seeing it going away. We think that those risks, reputational risks and crises that are happening, those are here to stay. There are some of the key trends that we're identifying for this year. In fact, some of those trends are only growing on the geopolitical side and the social polarization side. Definitely things are getting worse, and companies need to consider quite carefully what they say, who they say to, when they talk, what position they take. And it's not as easy to keep a moral high ground. There's a lot of different voices that are going to go for and against you, and that trend is continuing. On the ESG side, that conundrum is only getting worse. ESG is in and out of vogue all the time. Companies are either lauded or shamed, both for doing too much or for doing too little. It's very difficult to figure out what to do and what to say these days. That is a trend that is continuing, and that is a reputational risk that's continuing. The AI side, of course, provides a lot of opportunities for companies for efficiencies and productivity alongside with reputational risks. There are leaks, there are fakes, there are employee concerns. There's a lot of different issues there that are also creating reputational risks. And then, of course, on the talent side, we're seeing this as one of the key reputation management trends for this year. The rise of the employer brand, which means a lot of things, but again brings in that issue of polarization and the issue of actually making sure that you address employee concerns without alienating other employees. This is something that companies are continuing to struggle with. So given all that, it's important to remember that this idea of connecting the dots between your communication activities and the business impact, it's not something that companies should do on a campaign basis, on an ad hoc basis. It's a 24/7, always-on effort, always-on imperative, as we see it, that companies need to consider in order to make sure that at any given time, they understand how their actions are impacting perceptions, but also how the outside world is impacting perceptions, and what actually they can do about it, such as the example of the Atlanta-based company that I mentioned before. And I was asked to summarize this with key takeaways and key predictions, and I thought that was actually a very good way for us to think about, well, where are we now and where are we going from here? So the key takeaways from this, or if I had to summarize basically everything I said in 4 points, I would say this: earning trust and reputation requires ongoing perception tracking and activation. Ongoing, not ad hoc, not annually. Inside actionability comes from continuity and accuracy of impact-related data, not output-related data, or not just output-related, because output is very valuable as well, of course. Data-driven reputation management builds financial value and helps navigate the poly crisis. So this is not just about being able to have vanity KPIs, and it's not just about being able to occasionally look better as a comms unit. It's also about building financial value for your company, as we saw from the Ocean Tomo study, and it's about helping your company navigate this polycrisis era. And then lastly, macro level uncertainty, social polarization, and other reputation threats are here to stay. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be going away. So where are we going in the future? This is what we call the future of stakeholder intelligence. What is the future of stakeholder intelligence? And there's a lot of, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that as well in the next couple of days. But the way that we see it, the future of stakeholder intelligence relates very closely to what's going to happen with AI and how we're going to be using AI. So today we're already using AI. Others are using AI to be able to consolidate and analyze metrics in an easier way. We use it to analyze multi-source data to identify what's happening, and even sometimes to identify why things are happening. So there's so much data coming in. AI is helping us, certainly the way that we're using it, it's helping us and our users get answers to the question, why? The next frontier that we're seeing and the things that we're working on right now is to be able to answer the question, so what now? What should I do about it? AI is going to help us actually predict stakeholder concerns. It's going to help us actually react to them. It's going to guide our crisis response and a lot of our actions in the company. This is what we're working on now, and this is what we feel AI brings to the table. But the other prediction that we have is that the more we use AI, the more there's going to be a need for human judgment. So one of the risks that we're seeing is there's this growing trend of over-reliance on AI analysis, which makes sense because it saves us a lot of time and it can give us a lot of insights that we would otherwise miss. But there are certain things that AI won't be able to do for us. So certain things like showing empathy to our stakeholders, or basically having a judgment call of what to do or not to do in a certain situation, AI is not going to be able to do that for us. So we think that the importance of human judgment will grow, and we think that at the end of the day, the ones who get it right will be the ones who know how to achieve a harmony of both sides. So using the efficiency, using the productivity of AI alongside with using the human element of empathy, creativity, listening skills, understanding, and also making judgment calls. Thank you very much.
Shahar, thank you very much. I have some questions, but first of all, does anyone in the room?
Sorry, we need to take microphones because we're streaming.
Right, okay. Can you hear me in the streaming world? So first of all, does anyone have any questions for Shahar? Ben Levine.
Thank you, Shahar. That was great. Just a quick, somewhat technical question, and it's about audience. So I love and see the value of ongoing reputation checking weekly, daily. What is your view on getting the right balance of audience segmentation in the context of reputation, right? Because like not all audiences matter to all organizations. So how do you navigate that within Caliber, and what advice do you typically give to your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can tell you how we do it at Caliber. Basically, we interview people about companies that they're highly familiar with. That's basically the screener technically that we use, right? If you're highly familiar with a company, you're qualified. Obviously, we look at a representation of demographics and all that to make sure that the results every week are comparative because they're sampled consistently based on demographic representation. But then the screener is how well do you know the company? If you know it well, we consider you to be relevant to interview. That's how we do it on a multi-stakeholder reputation tracker way. We also have another way of doing it when we do brand trackers, where we only interview people who qualify as a relevant audience because of the profession that they have, or because of certain demographics that they have, or certain behavioral or socioeconomic parameters. And that's usually for companies who only want to focus on prospects and customers, or companies who only want to focus on talent, or only on investors, and so on. So that's our two ways of technically focusing on an audience that is relevant. However, generally what we advise companies to do is to think more broadly about stakeholders. We often work with B2B companies and they say, we don't care about all these people. We don't care about the public. We only care about decision makers who might buy our products. We tell them that's a very narrow view of your reputation. There are a lot of stakeholders out there that are going to impact your reputation, that are going to impact your business. Some of them might not be decision makers who will buy your products. They might be people who would want to work for you. They might be people living in communities where you have a facility. They might be people who are related to other policymakers or decision makers or media. They might be investing in your stock. Maybe they bought your stock. So the idea is that those stakeholders don't matter because they're not buying our products is a very antiquated idea in our book. And we always try to educate our clients against that and say, if somebody is highly familiar with your company, you should consider their opinions, because if they themselves do not represent a relevant audience, they might be talking to somebody who is a relevant audience. And you need to understand that broader context.
That's great, thank you. And I think we've got time for one more question. And I would just like to say, for any people streaming it, if you have asked questions, I'm afraid we can't see them just at the moment, but we will make sure that they're passed on to Shahar, and Shahar will deliver a response. Right, next question, and this will be the last question before the break.
I was just going to ask, so I understand the idea of doing a daily sort of survey and having that information in real time. The cost of that seems like it might be prohibitive for most companies, though. So how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, and that's also something that we often get, and the answer is no, it's not. Of course, if you want to do it across the entire world, if you want to understand the perceptions in 20 different countries and understand the perceptions of you and 10 of your competitors, and you want to do it at a very high volume so that every day you get enough responses to give you a statistically valid result, that's going to be expensive. Most of our clients don't do that. Some of them focus only on their domestic market or maybe 3 to 5 key strategic markets. And what we give them, depending on what their needs are, we do the interviews on a daily basis, but we do it in a way that the results are statistically valid on a weekly basis. So we don't interview 1,000 people for your company every day. We might only interview 20 every day, or maybe 10 every day, so that over a week you accumulate a statistically valid result. And that is actually not so cost prohibitive, because today you can get access to these panels at a lower cost level, and there's a lot of economies of scale and efficiencies, and today also with automation, the costs have gone way down.
That's great, thank you. Right, well, thanks very much, and thank you, Shahar, for a great first session. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show our appreciation for Shahar Silbershatz, and then off for the coffee break. Thank